So, Deathloop is pretty good, I guess. Welcome back, y'all, to something a little different today. A review. Yep, that's right. Finally, for the first time in over a year, it's the first official review of a game on this channel. And today we're going to be talking about Deathloop, Arkane Lyon's first-person shooting time loop mystery. Arkane has always been a studio that I loved. The Dishonored series is incredible, and Prey is such an underrated modern classic that more people need to give a shot. Aside from that, Arkane hasn't had that breakout hit until quite possibly now, more or less. Deathloop grants the player with the perfect balance of shooting, sneaking, puzzling, and story unraveling fun, with the only drawbacks being its various bugs and crashes and a finicky multiplayer concept. Which is why today, without major spoilers, we'll be discussing Deathloop's story, gameplay, design, and multiplayer, going in depth with every aspect of this game that makes it great or falls short in some instances. So without further delay, let's loop. Deathloop's story has to be the most interesting to date that Arkane has worked on. Taking place in the 1960s on the island of Black Reef, you play as Colt Vaughn, waking up moments after being murdered by one Juliana Blake, the main antagonist of the story and one of 8 visionaries that are responsible for the time loop that the entire island is stuck in. Colt has no memory of what is going on and why it's happening, and he quickly learns that the only way to break the loop is to kill every single one of these visionaries in one loop. That's the general story without spoiling too much, and honestly that's as far as it goes. What's most interesting is the stories behind each visionary. Throughout the game, you'll find notes, terminals, and audio recordings that give you a bit of insight of what's going on, who these people are, and what needs to be done. This is the main vessel in which the story is being told, especially in the stories of each character. It might seem a little bit overwhelming, but luckily for every notes, recording, and terminal you find, the game gives you a brief summary of the main information that is needed, as well as records that main information in a discoveries and leads tabs, which we'll get into later. On top of that, Colt sees these messages all over the environment, and well, we don't really quite learn from who. He does see them, and it does give the player some clues about the story and even how to approach each area. It's a more immersive sim style approach to storytelling, since there are barely any cutscenes that really do move the story forward. For the most part, you'll be sifting through notes and messages, or, my personal favorite, listen to the interactions between Colt and Juliana.
Remember saying, with the state of the world today, eons are only hope for the future.
Proof for it never happened.
With the state of the world today, eons are only hope for the future.
Who are you going to be today, Colt? Is there anyone left you haven't turned on?
Wait, I turn you on?
I turn you off.
While you only really hear them at the start of each area, you really do get to see that rivalry brew throughout the whole game. The voice acting is incredible, and the performances these two characters have are incredible. It really makes these characters so much more likable, and it always brought a smile to my face seeing these two argue with each other.
So, what's your opinion on secrets?
I have nothing to hide.
Seriously? It's not always about you, Colt. You know, I cannot believe the shit that comes out of your mouth. You're broken. You're just broken man with that repeats the same fucking answer over and over and over again.
So is this about you or Charlie or... No, wait. It is about me, isn't it? Like a reverse psychology thing or...
It's easy to see how the story could be hard to follow, since there's barely anything really telling you, the player, the story. For those that don't really like reading the notes or just completely miss the summaries, you'll get an offhand comment from Colt after a major note here and there, but still, it's quite easy not to follow or just simply miss out on a lot of these notes completely. Which is quite unfortunate for those that don't really like reading every single note, but I don't really see the story being told any better. It's mainly a mystery, and having this player learn all these details and really piece everything together is kind of my favorite part of the story. And again, nearly everything that you get and collect will be chronicled for you and with its own waypoint marker, and for those that tend to get lost and need some guidance. And honestly, Arkane did the greatest job possible to make sure that players aren't lost, and I applaud them for that effort. If you've played any of the other Arkane joints, this will be very much familiar to you. Nearly identical to Dishonored, but honestly, it's not a bad thing. Dishonored played so well, and in this game it's much more shooter focused than the melee combat of Dishonored. It still has the signature Arkane play your way, where you can go in guns blazing, or stealth meticulously and take everybody out without a trace. It does do a great job granting the player with unique opportunities and paths that make that play your way ideology sing true in practice. However, it's not without its flaws. I played on a PS5 with a controller, and the aim assist was a bit too aggressive sometimes. or lazy at times. It was either too strong or too weak, which is why I mainly stuck to stealth, headshotting people with a nail gun one by one. It was very rare for me to engage a situation guns blazing with an SMG or anything, because it just never felt right. Even then, stealth had a few issues with detection from NPCs being random at times, which was very frustrating but luckily was rare. And there were a few instances early on where enemies were quite bullet spongy since your weapons are weaker, but thankfully it's an issue that is resolved a few hours in. Weapons have a good amount of variety. They are split into the multicolor rarity tiers that we're all familiar with. You got pistols, revolvers, snipers, SMGs, and more, with gold tier weapons being some of the more unique weapons, like dual pistols that turn into an SMG, which is really cool. You're also equipped with a hack-a-majig, which hacks things, as the name implies, like doors, turrets, as well as radios and vending machines as distractions. You also have grenades that honestly don't get much use after the opening hours. You also get a nice variety of powers, aka slabs, that you get from killing each of the visionaries, each one having their own specific power. Similar to its gameplay, some of these are straight from the Dishonored series, like the Shift, which teleports you short distances, and Nexus, which links enemies together and triggers a domino effect, which were the ones I stuck to the most. But you also have Aether, which makes you invisible, Havoc, a damage and health buff, Carnesis, a Jedi Force-like power that flings enemies in any direction, and two abilities unique to the two playable characters, Colt and Juliana. Colt is equipped with Reprise, which allows the player to die twice before restarting the loop, and Juliana, on the multiplayer side of things, is equipped with Masquarde, which allows her to swap appearances with NPCs in the level, which we'll get more into that later as well. Throughout the game, you also collect trinkets for your character, weapons, and slabs. These are smaller buffs that affect your health or power regen, weapon recoil and accuracy, and even give you a double jump on the character side of things, with slab upgrades granting you much more diversity in your abilities. And again, all of these aspects do make for a pretty solid shooter. However, the shooting doesn't feel as smooth as it should, and it makes sense since Arcane doesn't do the fast-paced Call of Duty shooters. They excel more in the immersive sim department, and they did this pretty well. Even stealth has its few issues with detection, like previously mentioned, but it never was truly frustrating and only happened a couple of times, and it's nothing that can't be fixed without a couple of patches. It's no Deus Ex or System Shock, but if you enjoyed Prey or even the latest Hitman trilogy, you will have fun with the abundance of ways you could play here and the choices you have. Now, the words restarting your loop might worry you, but worry not, because Arcane has found a way to make it as accessible as possible. It's not a roguelike like so many people have been confused about. It's simply a time loop. Each day is split into morning, noon, afternoon, and night, and once the day is over, it loops all over again, with the majority of the world resetting itself. There are 4 main districts for the players to explore, each changing differently depending on the time of day. I previously mentioned discoveries and leads, and let's get into it. Leads are your main objectives. You have visionary leads, which guide you into learning more about each visionary and ways you can take them out, and you also have arsenal leads, which clue you in on some of the stronger weapons and upgrades for slabs. Discoveries are minor clues like codes for certain areas or information about each district that could be useful. Nearly every lead is dependent on what district it is located in and what time of day it is available. So once you get into that loop, no pun intended, of scheduling out your leads and trying to figure out the most efficient way of hitting everything at once, man, does it get satisfying. It reminded me a lot of the latest Hitman games. I played those games trying to do every single one of the mission stories, which were objectives that showed you each and every possibility and opportunity, and it really helped in terms of learning each level. In DEATHLOOP, it could be as major as figuring out an experiment for one of your targets so that once they see that it's done, they'll be found in another district alongside another visionary. Or they can be as minor as just checking this room for clues, or even if that room is available during that time of day. The player will learn nearly every nook and cranny by the end of the game, because you really start to live in this world, and naturally by following these leads you do memorize almost everything. But for those that do prefer being much more self-taught and don't like markers everywhere so much, that's completely an option too. You can turn off all of the markers, just read the objective and it'll clue you in on where to go and what general direction to head towards. There are even some locations that get no leads or discoveries for, so it's made for completionists like me that really like to look for everything, search through every building, search through every room. It's very much a game that respects the player's intelligence enough to allow it to be as accessible as possible. As you explore, you'll find strange objects around the world that are filled with residium, a material that is able to be used to infuse weapons, slabs, and trinkets, so that you'll be able to use them again after each loop, since once the loop is over, anything that isn't infused will be lost. So you really start to pick and choose which weapons, slabs, and trinkets you want to use the most and which ones work best for you. Before each level, you'll get a bit of a planning phase where you set up your loadouts and figure out what best tools you need for each district, depending on the time of day and depending on which lead you're trying to follow. It's to nobody's surprise that Arkane's design is great as always, especially here, being such a difficult concept of time loops to really design a game after. Since its reveal, after dozens and dozens of showcase this game has been presented at, it's still, even before launch, been a mystery and how this game would work and what it really is. And I'm sure most of you guys watching this review are still confused, but in its practice it just clicks so well and works so well. Now, with all the gameplay and design out of the way, you might still be confused, and again, that's understandable, especially when Arkane throws multiplayer into the mix. It's not a traditional multiplayer mode, but it's more Dark Souls style invasions. When you start the game, you'll have options to either break the loop when you play through the story as Colt, or protect the loop and invade other players' worlds. As Colt, when you're being invaded, you'll get a notice that Juliana is on the hunt. The tunnels that you use to get in and out of levels are locked, and the only way to re-access them is to hack an antenna in the district, making it optional sometimes to actually kill your invader. As Juliana, you'll get a brief amount of time to prepare. All you have to do is kill Colt 3 times, since he has the reprise ability. It's an interesting concept, and it does a good job of throwing that wrench into your works. However, it doesn't quite nail it, and it's quite possibly my least favorite part of the game. Not because of the invasion aspect, because I do love that idea, and I always have, and it makes for so much more interesting gameplay situations. I mainly dislike it because, like previously mentioned, Deathloop isn't great in terms of shooting, making most of the engagements less about skill and more about who gets to jump on who and who has the better weapons and upgraded slabs. There are issues with latency that really makes these engagements not fun, especially if you're being invaded and Juliana invades you, has like 3 health buff trinkets on top of the havoc that they decide to use, and just rush you with a shotgun. Like previously mentioned, it's optional to kill your invader, but 9 times out of 10, you'd really want to, since you'll almost always be invaded at the start of each level, which, for real, it does start to feel scripted sometimes, getting invaded right on cue. Plus, for some reason, every single time they invade, they will always be where the antenna is located. I restarted the same area about 4 times just out of curiosity, seeing how it would be different if I get invaded or not. And without skipping a beat, I was invaded at the same time by 4 different players, and they were all always in the same exact area. Does it make sense strategically? Maybe, because I guess the Colt is always going to try to go for the antenna, but I don't know, I guess it really takes away from that surprise factor of invasions, since you always know the general area where the invaders will be at. You do have the option to turn off invasions or have them on just for friends, and I honestly just recommend that you just turn them off, because you will still get invaded by an AI controlled Juliana, and you will still get the rewards and the upgrades that you need without the headache of players abusing the Havoc meta. So yeah, and surprisingly, the AI does provide that some sort of variety that I was kind of looking for. It's interesting in practice, but honestly, would be so much better. This game would be so much better without a multiplayer aspect. It's not much that could be fixed with just a patch. Just structurally, it kind of fumbles the bag for those that are being invaded. On the invader side of things, there is some fun to be had, but not enough for me to want to go back, since the gunplay isn't quite there. It's the weakest part of the game, unfortunately, and I mainly think it's just a result of doing too much at once. Word me at its announcement, and I hate that I was right, because this could have been so much more fun, with maybe antennas being much more randomized, or invasions being at random times during each level that weren't always at the beginning of the level. Gunplay being much more refined, and if powers like Havoc weren't so powerful and much more balanced, that allowed you to get one-shotted. Deathloop is a great murder puzzle game that really executes the idea of time loops very well, that only struggles with a lackluster multiplayer component and a couple of bugs and crashes. Even then, I highly recommend this game for those that love immersive sims, any of Arkane's prior titles, and the latest Hitman series. It does a great job, and honestly an incredible job, of leading the player through this great story and intriguing world, all while getting you into the gameplay loop of scheduling like your leads, getting upgrades, infusing your weapons and slabs, learning layouts of each district during each time of day, and figuring out what's the most efficient way to kill all your targets in one loop. and once that happens, it's one of the most satisfying things I experienced in a game in a long time. It does tend to drag towards the end because it will feel repetitive since you will be exploring the same locations over and over, but you really should, since by the end you feel like you know the island of Black Reef. It's a great time with minor things that hold it back from being amazing, but I can't find myself not recommending this game. It's definitely an 8 out of 10 for me. That could be higher if the multiplayer was better or simply removed, and if more bugs and crashes were ironed out over time. It might be in the conversation for Game of the Year for me, but for now, that's where it is. Let me know what y'all thought, if you're interested now in the game or not, if you've played it and have different thoughts that I did, and all that good stuff. Do all the YouTube things that help support the channel, the likes, the comments, the subs, the shares, and all that good stuff, because I'd love you for that. So, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you want more of these more in-depth reviews. It was a lot of fun making this one. I had a ton of fun playing this game, so yeah, let me know if you want some more of this. I'll catch y'all next time. Remember to stay safe and to love each other. Bye.